Okay, welcome again to Avodas HaParsha and beautiful Ner Avram and Shai Chesed Yerushalayim. So, Eile Masei B'nei Yisrael, right? These are the travels, our second Parsha this week. Eile Masei B'nei Yisrael, right? That Asher Yatzu Me'eretz Mitzrayim. These are the travels of B'nei Yisrael who came out of Mitzrayim. So we're going to be working a lot tonight with a piece from someone named Gudl Eisner. I've spoken about him before. Gudl Eisner was a Ger Chassid from Lodz. He was an educator, and they had a special Masifta high school in Lodz, and then he was in the camps for a long time. The Polish Jews who went in at the beginning, if they survived, they were in there 3, almost 4 years in the camps, and he was one of those. And he did many things to keep people's spirits up in the camps, strengthen their emunah. Afterwards, he was a very well-known educator here in Eretz Yisrael. So it's just very important to know, because a lot of times when a person is giving you chizuk and taking out from the parsha something, and this is how you have to deal with adversity, we're thinking, yeah, what do you know about adversity? Here, you bow your head. If he's able to say, this is what we can do in times of adversity, he knows what he's talking about. So he says like this. And he would give shiurim on the Sfas Emes. That's why he's bringing a few pieces of Sfas Emes that we'll look at as well. These travels are the travels of Bnei Yisrael Asher Yatzu Me'eretz Mitzrayim, meaning this is the continuation of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim is one of the most central things that a Jew is supposed to remember. And it influences us to this very day. So what the Torah is telling us here at the beginning of Masei, don't think of Yetzias Mitzrayim just getting out of Mitzrayim, just crossing Yam Suf. All of these travels in the Midbar, which again came as a result of Chet HaEgel and Chet HaMeraglim, they were going to go into Eretz Yisrael much more quickly. This was all part of the Yetzias Mitzrayim process. And just as the Geula of Mitzrayim influences us every day, so too these journeys that they took influence us every day. Okay, now some of the journeys were, so to speak, regular, but then many of them came because they had to spend many more years in the desert. And that was punitive, so to speak. But a punishment that comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rav Chaim Friedlander always says, you have to realize it's never nekama, it's never revenge, it's tikkun, it's repair. And repair in ways that are not just, sometimes teachers imagine that if you tell the kid to write 1,000 times, I will not speak in class, that does some kind of tikkun. Usually it doesn't. It's more punishment than revenge, or at least that's what he feels. Here, Am Yisrael were doing very purposeful things. Every location they stopped, every place they traveled to next was guided by Hashem. They were following that Anon, that heavenly cloud, which guided them where they're supposed to go. And each place had its own challenge. Okay? Later in Sefer Dvarim, Moshe Rabbeinu talks about Hashem hamolichecha bamidbar hagadol v'hanoira. Hashem who took you through this desert that was so vast and frightening. Nachash saraf ha'akrov, the place of the snake and the serpent and the scorpion. Now, right, even though it said that the Anan, right, the heavenly cloud kind of protected them from those things, but it's telling us something about the nature of the midbar. These creatures aren't something that sting or bite. They represent forces, they represent powers. The Medrash says, Nachash is Bavel, right, is Babylonia. Saraf is Madai, Media, Persia. Akrov is Yavan, is Greece. Meaning, they were battling the forces that Am Yisrael would have to battle in their future. With each station they were at, they were helping us, preparing us for what we would have to do in the future. They went through every possible type of challenge that Am Yisrael and his generations would go through. And he says you have to realize they were like creating the seed from which all the tree and branches and leaves of Am Yisrael would branch out of afterwards. So in our DNA was put the ability to meet one challenge after another, different challenges, and to overcome them and move on to the next one. Okay, so that's why the very process itself is one that we have to know. When you look in different Sfarim, so they do have drushas on each name of a place sometime, it gives us the names. The names have meanings, and they represent those different challenges you can see in different ways. Okay, so this lets us understand this whole period in the Midbar. Where Moshe Wolfson pointed out very beautifully that, I don't know what the minig is in this shul, in many shuls they have the minig to read the Masos with the same type of special trop as you do in Oz Yosher. Right? It says that Oz Yosher was this triumphant thing of Am Yisrael traveling out, right, toward their destiny. All of these travels, and in fact 7 of them where they went backwards, it says even, all of them were part of the destiny of Am Yisrael and that travel from Yetzias Mitzrayim to where they were supposed to be going. Okay, now, this doesn't just apply nationally, it applies personally. So Emes refers to something very famous from the Degel Machne Ephraim. Degel Machne Ephraim was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And he said that, he quotes his grandfather, he says, I heard from my grandfather, that all of these 42 travels are applied to every person from the day he's born until the day he leaves this world. He says that when you're born from the womb of your mother, he says this is an aspect of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kanoda. Okay, meaning the Midrashim all compare Am Yisrael leaving Mitzrayim as a baby being born. Mitzrayim, in its literal meaning, means restrictions, constrictions, limitations. Right? Coming out from those, you're coming into the world. That's your Yetzias Mitzrayim. And now you have a life in front of you of 42 different travels. And that's 42 different challenges. And everyone is going to go through their own version of these in their lifetime. So therefore we have to know how to look at them, how to deal with them. First of all, to know when you meet a challenge is that this is part of your destiny. This is not because you took a wrong turn. This is not because of, something that's wrong with you per se. But this was already in your DNA to meet challenges and to be able to hopefully overcome them. And when a person falls, that also brings about its challenge. Right? Am Yisrael did not always do the right thing in each place in the Midbar, as we see. Moshe Rabbeinu goes through that with them. And yet, you get up and you move on to the next thing. We are called Mahalchim. We're called walkers. Right? This is in the Navi and Zechariah. Refers to people as Mahalchim, those who walk. And that means we're supposed to go from Madrega to Madrega on these many different travels we have. That's what the Sfas Emes says. Just as it was with Klal Yisrael, Kein kol prat tzarich lavar kol hatikunim yetzias Mitzrayim ad lovu le'eretz Yisrael beis hamikdash. We all have in our life that travel of traveling through the desert, getting to our Eretz Yisrael and our Beis HaMikdash. Now here, he comes to a very beautiful pirush of the pasuk that we say, Vayhi bin Soa ha'aron, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Hashem, v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusam esanecha miponecha. So we have to visualize this in our mind. Every time Am Yisrael traveled, they would pack up the camp, and when the Aron traveled, they would say these words, Kuma Hashem, v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusam esanecha miponecha. Now these words are very deliberate. What does it mean, Kuma Hashem? Get up Hashem. So Rav Gudl explains it in the following way. He says, when they traveled, they awakened and aroused and revealed the godliness that was hidden in each place where they were. That's the ultimate challenge that a person has to meet. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere, and we are the ones who have to find His presence and, so to speak, awaken that presence. Then, v'yafutzu oivecha, your enemies scatter. Why do they scatter? If you imagine, like the Gemara talks about this in Shabbos, you have a pot covered with straw, let's say, and you pick up the cover of the pot. What happens to the straw? It simply scatters. When a person awakens the godliness in the place where he is, so then the oivim, meaning those negative forces that are present there, they simply scatter. Okay, naturally, meaning the idea that a person goes to battle, so to speak, in each of these different stations in life, but the main part of the battle is simply connecting to Hashem where you are, and then the enemy's scattered. And then V'yanusu misanecha miponecha. Then, right, the negative forces that are misanecha. Right, now the diktuk here is a little interesting. It's not sonecha, it's not those people that hate you. Misanecha, it's like those people who make you hate, or those forces that make you hate. Meaning, he says, when you awaken that godliness, you're able to drive away this sitra achar, this opposing force that tries to make your Judaism hateful. That's the ikar battle, right? That a lot of times the fight is, even if it's not to get you to not do a mitzvah, right? It's to get the world of Torah and mitzvahs to be hateful to you. He says, if you can realize that in the situation that I'm in, and with what I'm able to do, with what Hashem wants me to do in this position, and sometimes it's very limited, but you do what you can there, then that power which can make your Judaism hateful runs away, scatters. So, because this is part of what he does. Now, part of what the Yetzer Hara does to make it hateful to us is to get us to feel that we're failures, to get us to feel that no one likes to keep doing something that they're a failure at. And the more the Yetzer Hara can convince us that we're failures at Judaism, so then it's a very hateful experience. It's not something, right? It doesn't mean you're supposed to have delusions that you're the Chafetz Chaim when you're not, okay? But it does mean that a person's supposed to be able to see and have joy with what he's doing, okay? And this is what the Sfas Emes, the Imre Emes, the son of the Sfas Emes, wrote in a famous letter. He wrote, "L'avodas Hashem yisborach b'simcha b'kol ma shetaseh." Serve Hashem with simcha in everything you do. Hein ba'asiyas ha-mitzvahs, whether it's mitzvahs you're doing, hein be'esek haTorah. Ve'al tashgiach klal al ha'yetzer ha'mevalbel lohavi atzvus u'laharbus b'dikdukim. He says, pay no attention to the yetzer that is mixing you up to bring you to sadness and to get you to try and focus on doing more and more details. Dikdukim doesn't mean not doing the mitzvah in shleimus. It means part of our challenge with the mitzvahs, you can always do it more or different or with another thing or trying to fulfill 15 other shitas or something like this. He says, you shouldn't do that. He says, and realize the following. It says in Pirkei Avos, having mechashiv hefsed mitzvah, think about what you lose from a mitzvah keneged schara, against the reward of the mitzvah. He says, what does this mean? A lot of times a person feels to himself, look, the mitzvah doesn't really mean that much to me. Look at me, I'm not that excited. Okay, I put on tefillin. He says, you really do care about it. How do I know? He says, if somebody came over to you and offered you 1,000,000 rubles in order to not put on tefillin today, you wouldn't do it. He says, that shows that putting on tefillin is worth 1,000,000 rubles to you. Right? Phrasing it like in another way, sometimes you'll see a person, again, he puts on tefillin robotically. Then he takes a business trip, and he calls up his wife, and he says, are my tefillin on the bed? She says, yeah, they are. Right? And he's out in, I don't know, the Congo or something like this. He says, can you ship me tefillin? Like, how do I get, where is there a Chabad here? Where's the clothes? He'll go nuts. He'll hire a helicopter to get to the tefillin. And a person who sat next to him in shul for years would say, never saw you that worked up about your tefillin. But it is there inside of you. He says, so don't let the Yetzer Hara also convince you, right, that it's something that means nothing to you, because that certainly makes it hateful. Now, the other aspect of misan echo means the Yetzer Hara would like you to behave in a way that gets people to hate Judaism. Okay? The mitzvah in the Torah says, "Va'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol moedecha." You should love Hashem, right, with all of your soul, with all of your, right, your everything, right, which Chazal explained, your money, your nafshecha, even giving up your life, moedecha, your money. And Chazal also darshaned on that, right, that not just you should love Hashem, but sheyehei shem shamayim misahev al yodcha. Make the name of Hashem beloved through you. Now, Cheskel Avramsky Zatzal said a fascinating, very simple but very beautiful idea on those two ways of darshaning it. Right? A person's supposed to think seriously when you say Shema, right? With all of my heart, with my Yetzer Tov, with my Yetzer Ra, with my everything to love Hashem. B'chol nafshecha, Jews in history have given up their lives, right? But nafshecha also means something I want, right? Avram Avinu speaking to Bnei Ches when he came to buy the Maras HaMachpelah, so they said, Im yeshes nafshechem, right? Avram, said to them, if you want, Rashi says their nafshechem means ritzonechem. So Mesiras Nefesh is not just giving a person, giving himself up to the Inquisition to get burnt at the stake. It means when a person wants something and they give up that desire for Ratzon Hashem. Okay, that can be the idea of nafshecha. B'chol modecha, even though it may cause financial loss or if you have to spend it. He says, so that also applies to the idea of causing Hashem's name to be loved by others. The same Mesiras Nefesh has to apply to that. It's a drasha on the same words. It's just simply a different drasha on va'ahavta. The first drasha is, you should love Hashem. The second drasha is, you should cause the name of Hashem to be loved through you. But the b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol modecha applies to both. He says, do you see how much a person is supposed to be doing and giving to try to make sure, okay, that will be? Like this is what the Rambam says, based on the Gemara. How is Shem Shamayim Yisayv al Yodecha? Right, it says that the person will learn and review and be Meshamish Talmidei Chachamim, learn from Talmidei Chachamim, and people will see that you're doing it besimcha, happily. And then, Maso Matonu Imabrios Benachas, when you interact with people, you do it gently, it's pleasant to speak with you. Maso Matonu Benachas Imabrios, and it says then, with all these things and everything he does, and he's doing this especially with simcha, then people will say, Ashrei Aviv Shalim Do Torah, fortunate is the father who taught him Torah, fortunate is the Rebbe who taught him Torah. Ru'u kama no'im derachav. See how beautiful his ways are. Kama metukanim maisav. How much his deeds are as they should be. Okay, so this is the aspect of fighting off misan echa. The Yetzer Hara tries to get us to behave in ways that will make people hate Judaism. This doesn't mean that a person has to compromise on the obligations of Torah, right? Many Jews sometimes use that as an excuse. Oh, I can't put on my tefillin here in the airport because people are going to think that Judaism is weird and they're going to hate Judaism, etc. No, a person proudly does what they do. But if you do, and if you do b'simcha, and if you're a loving, caring person, so then that reaction will be there as well. This is one example of it that is stuck in my mind so much. There was a great tzaddik here in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Avram Genachovsky, that's all. A great tzaddik, a great gon. He lived in Bnei Brak, but he would spend about 3 nights a week in the dormitory of the Tribuna Yeshiva where he taught. His wife let him be there at that. And I got to know him some in Boston because he had a son, Yono Vashalom, who was sick. And they came to get treatment in the hospitals in Boston. And I really got to see in him such perfection. Bein Adam Lamakom, uncompromisingly, and on every detail, right? Everything, choosing Bein Adam Lachavero, his interactions with people in a way that made people love him so much, to the extent, right, that it was one time I came, the Boston Rebbe's community had a project to help people who came for the hospitals in Boston. They call it Rofe, it's still there. And they provide them with places to stay and translators and transportation and stuff. So I used to do a little bit of the translating or transportation. So I came to the hospital with somebody else and I was asking for directions or something. So the nurse I was speaking to, and she was a real Boston Irish Catholic nurse, Kathleen O'Donoghue, something like that. And she said to me, tell me, did you know that tall rabbi from Israel, Rabbi Ger? They couldn't say Genachovsky very well, so usually stopped after the guy said, Rabbi Genachovsky. She said, that one. She said, we used to just like to watch him. They just used to like to watch him. And again, this was someone who looked Bnei Brak, from head to toe. And it reminded me of the pasuk that it says about Yosef in Mitzrayim, Benos Sa'ada Ale Shur, that the women would climb over the wall to see him. Not necessarily that he was a model, right? But there's a type of beauty which is there that caused people to see and sense. We all have the potential to do that. It's very hard to actually do it and to do it consistently. And when a person is, so to speak, Torah on 2 feet, and they're able to project that in each place, then v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. Those powers that make people hate Judaism run away, even though you're uncompromising in your details of halacha and everything which is there. That is something we're supposed to realize we have to do, and that's part of our travels. Rav Moshe Shapiro Zatzal used to refer to the pasuk in Yechezkel that says here, "V'otzeisi eschem." Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second. Pasuk Lamed Hey. "Ve'vesi eschem el midbar ha'amim." I'll bring you to the desert of nations. Now, the Mefarshei Pshat, let's say that talks about this midbar that we're talking about, the desert that Am Yisrael traveled through. Why is it called the midbar of nations? So some of the Mefarshim say because the desert was there, but there were nations on the boundaries, right? Some is because they eventually got to Sichon v'Og. Others say that there were unknown nations, there were tribes of Bedouins or such in the desert. Right? Chazal talk about the idea that they would buy things sometimes from the Tagorim, right? They would have, one of these ice cream trucks or something would show up there in the Midbar and they would buy. But Moshe brings the idea that Midbar Ha'amim is our desert. Our long journey throughout the world, we're also going through a desert. It's a desert of nations where we go from station to station, from nation to nation, and there we are always under attack. Now, a Jew is supposed to somewhat embrace this, to know that the entire period here is discussed just as one travel, camping, the next traveling. So the Sfas says, in your struggles, in your battles, he says you have to realize that this is what you're going to be doing. And he says, and even though you will fall sometime, you rest up and you go on your next travel. Right? It says the Sfas lo dial am Hashem, to let am Hashem know ki kol ovid Hashem lo yipol libolov mikol anafilos sheyesh lo. No ovid Hashem should get down, depressed because of his downfalls. Ki kachu amido. This is the way of the worldlios. Olev yored. You go up and down. Umikol menucha shesigo achrei ze milchama. And if you fought a battle and you get to rest a bit, the purpose of that is to get ready because there's going to be another milchama v'chein la'olam. And so it is. And it seems exhausting in certain ways. But, he says, we have to realize that it's a travel. Okay? Each time you fight a battle, each time you meet someone, you may stay in the same city all of your life. Some people do. Right? But you'll still be traveling those 42 travels with the different challenges. And this, we'll finish with his words here. Ki la'olam yesh milchamas li'ish Yisrael. There are always battles for a Jew. Tzrichim letzapos lotzeis mikol maso lovo achar kach lemaso milchama acheres. So what am I looking forward to as a Jew? Right? Sometimes you think it's depressing that I can't just fight and then relax and enjoy. Right? What keeps people going oftentimes is the anticipation of, if I just get over this hump, things are going to be okay. Somebody told me this line, said, the problem with New York is that the light at the end of the tunnel is New Jersey. Okay, people who understand. But so he says, that isn't us. He says, you're going to be coming to another journey and another milchama. But it's purposeful. It's traveling. It's moving from where you're supposed to be going and getting there. There was a little management book. I don't like reading management books, and I've known too many people who get so caught up in management books, but there was this little cute one that somebody wrote. It was called The 1 Minute Manager. So he says, if an employee comes to me and says, I have a problem. He says, what's your problem? I don't like X, Y, and Z or something. He says, you don't have a problem. I can't help you. He says, why? He says, that's not a problem. That's a complaint. A complaint is saying, I'm in point A, I don't like it. A problem is, I'm in point A, I would rather be in point B. How do I get there? Then I can help you. A Jew is always working with a problem, right? Not a complaint. It can be hard where we are. It can be a struggle. But that struggle is always going from point A to point B and eventually getting us to where we're supposed to go.